Sure.
Okay. And do we even need to do a countdown? I guess we should do a countdown.
Yeah, we probably should. It's always a good idea, even though the YouTube audience probably is like, "What the hell? Why do they do the weird stuff?" So we're going to do a countdown here, Dylan. That helps me sync up the tracks later in post.
Josh is going to be so mad we didn't record the pre-show.
What, the pre-show about fixing his microphone and everything?
That's what the pre-show's always. It's setting up our audio stuff. It's so fascinating. All right.
Okay.
Let's go. We count down from 5, and we'll ask you to do that out loud with us, and then we clap after the 1. Make sense?
Okay, yeah.
All right.
All right. Here we go. Dylan Johnson interview for Marginal Gains. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Slate.
We need to get slates.
I know. We should just get slates. That would be cool, huh?
That's what you're getting for Christmas.
Who, me?
Yeah.
Sometime the
I'm not getting
guy,
Dylan one for Christmas.
That's true. Geez, did I have any questions too? Oh, what year did you win the BWR Triple Crown, Dylan?
So I didn't win it. I got 3rd place.
Oh,
that was the one.
That? Okay.
That was the one mistake that I saw in there. So
okay.
Podium.
3rd place. What year was that? Last year?
That was last year, 2021.
2021. Cool. And this year it was a quad. And then I
didn't do the quad crown. There was already enough on my plate with the Lifetime Grand Prix.
I'm going to have Michael Marks in studio on Friday. In fact, he'll be here. So
awesome.
Have a discussion with him for the Marginal Gain show. It'll probably be less marginal gaining and more just about future of gravel and how BWR gets started and stuff like that. But
that'll be a great one.
Yeah,
ask him about all these new ones he's adding as well.
Yeah, He's going to be up to 6, I think, next year.
Yeah, sweet.
Which is a lot.
I got to check out some of those new ones. I really like the Michigan one that he added.
Mm-hmm. Alexi went up there, correct? Yeah, he did.
Yeah, crushed it.
Crushed it
as he has been all year.
Yeah, he's been very good. I mean, the race the race outside of Keegan has been a lot of fun to watch. Just Keegan's been kind of in the way of the Grand Prix stuff. So,
right.
Okay, we all set to go?
Let's go.
Okay, cool. Hello, Marginal Gains listeners and viewers on YouTube. We welcome to the show Dylan Johnson. Dylan is a Silka athlete, but that's not the real reason. Is it the real reason he's here? Maybe. It's how we got a hold of Dylan. It's a reason he's here. It makes it easier for us to get him on the show for certain. But Dylan's also just wrapped up a lengthy season. I would guess a pretty tough season. Lifetime Grand Prix where he finished 16th. Plus other events that Dylan likes to get involved in. And he runs a YouTube channel where he puts out, consistent content that is great for just about anybody to use, not just people at the pointy end. In fact, a lot of the YouTube videos, Dylan, caught my eye, and one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on this show to talk about, some of those topics. Of course, we're going to focus on Marginal Gains, since it's the Marginal Gains episode, but feel free to wander wherever you want on that. Dylan, we always like to kick off these interviews with just a little bike bio and the athlete. So, first of all, I understand you did your first 100-mile mountain bike race at the age of 15. Goodness, 15. So tell us, in addition to
that's
that,
bad parenting.
I know.
Probably,
tell us, in addition to that, how did the bike come into your life? Give us the early days for Dylan on the bike.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I started. My dad was into mountain biking. He wasn't a racer or anything, but he got me a mountain bike when I was either 11 or 12, I think, for my birthday or something, and I started riding with him. And I think I did my first race, just a local cross-country mountain bike race, when I was 13 or 14 years old. And the area that I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, kind of the big race there that all the mountain bikers seemed to be training for was the Shenandoah 100, which is a 100-mile mountain bike race in the Shenandoah Mountains in Virginia. So a lot of the riders that I was riding with at the time, they were training for that, and I wanted to do that as well. So yeah, I was 15 years old, and and that race is in September, so I trained all summer for it. Put in some really big weeks on the bike. Didn't really know what I was doing training wise. If I think back to what I was doing now, I cringe a little bit, but and I also did that first race on a single speed mountain bike, and it didn't have suspension either, so it was a rigid single speed mountain bike. So pretty far from what I have become, because I think the single speed mentality is pretty far from the marginal gains mentality, and I definitely consider myself a marginal gainer at this point. But
I love the 15-year-old you, man. 100 miles.
The 15-year-old me rigid. 15-year-old me was way cooler than 27-year-old me. I peaked at 15, and then I've only gotten nerdier since.
So I mean, 15 years old on a single speed in the Shenandoah 100. That's the setup we're talking about here. No suspension.
No suspension. Yeah.
Oh my! What a
and how? I mean, how did it go?
I broke my saddle, I broke my seat post 20 miles into the race, and fortunately, I got to an aid station not too long after that, and some woman actually just gave me her seat post. It happened to fit my bike.
Oh, wow.
Which is lucky because, seat posts come in all different sizes. And I didn't even switch the saddles. I just rode on her saddle, which I wasn't used to, for the next 80 miles. Mm-hmm. But I ended up finishing, I think, in 4th place, single speed. And this wasn't a junior category or anything, so I was pretty happy with that.
Nice.
And Shenandoah 100 has continued to be one of my favorite races since. And unfortunately this was the first year in however long it's been going on, 20-something years, that they weren't able to hold it. But I hope they get it back for next year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to know a little bit more of your origin story, because you started from this very non-marginal gainy perspective, right? Just like a single-speed rigid bike, a man after my own heart, frankly, and to where you are now, which is you are as marginal gainy as we are. You are our people, right? So where was the tipping point or the catalyst for really starting to care about not just being an amazing athlete, but being a really intellectual athlete, a very scientific athlete?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think there's one point where a light bulb went off in my head and I decided to be a marginal gainer. I think it was a slow progression of, when I was 15 years old, don't get me wrong, I wanted to race as fast as I could, but perhaps I didn't take the sport as seriously as I do now. And I just got more and more into the sport. And I started trying to go faster and faster and get better and better results. And it didn't take me long, after I was 15 to start becoming a marginal gainer. And the first thing I went to was weight. I was a mountain biker, and I was a classic weight weenie, and I was a weight weenie by the age of 17 and 18 years old. So that's only 2 or 3 years after I raced a single speed at Shenandoah 100. I was no longer on a single speed at that point, and I was a complete weight weenie. I think I had my hardtail mountain bike down to 19 pounds. Which is way lighter than any mountain bike I've had since. And I was absolutely obsessed with weight. At that time, I hadn't yet gone into drivetrain efficiency or tire rolling resistance or aerodynamics or any of that. But I was obsessed with weight. And then as the years have progressed, weight has become less and less of a priority. And those other things that I just mentioned have become more of a priority, mainly because I realized that they actually matter more than weight does.
Mm-hmm. It's funny how a lot of us have that progression, right? Those of us who are thinking not just about, how we as athletes perform, but about our equipment. weight is the place where we all start, right? I remember, friends drilling holes in their cranks, doing absolutely ridiculous stuff to shave, to shave grams at the expense of reliability. And it's kind of funny. I mean, you've followed that exact pattern.
Yeah.
So 100%. Take us from weight weenie teen to a person saying, I think I can make a living at this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, making a living doing this thing, I will say that there has never been a point in my life where the money that I was getting from bike racing and from sponsors was my main source of income, and it still to this day is not my main source of income, even though it is a substantial source of income for me. I graduated college and I immediately started working at CTS, the coaching company. Mm-hmm. Wasn't long after that I started the YouTube channel. And when I started the YouTube channel, I realized I didn't need to work at CTS because, they were taking a sizable cut and I could get athletes on my own. And for a long time, coaching and YouTube was my main source of income. In the last 3 years, racing has become a source of income as well, but it's still not even my biggest source of income compared to coaching and YouTube. So as far as going from a weight weenie to a professional bike racer, I mean, I would say that the professional bike racer doors opened when gravel started blowing up. I was a 100-mile mountain bike racer for a long time, doing the NUE series, and that series is not hugely popular, especially not anymore. And when gravel blew up, I was on board because gravel races tend to be long, and I already like doing long mountain bike races, and it was a pretty seamless transition. I kind of just had to learn tactics a little bit more, and I was still already playing the tactical game with endurance mountain bike racing, because there are endurance mountain bike races where there's actually a substantial amount of the race where you're on gravel and you're drafting. Yeah.
Well, you won the National Ultra Endurance Series 3 times. That's great. Was there any road racing in there?
No, it was just mountain bike racing. And it was all 100-mile mountain bike races. And that was the National Ultra Endurance Series was my main focus for about 5 years. I think from the time I was maybe 19 to 24-ish.
Mm-hmm. You also have a degree in exercise science from, and I might be mispronouncing, is it Brevard?
It is Brevard, yeah.
Okay,
Brevard,
and that's
North
where you
Carolina.
live now, right? You're in Brevard, North Carolina, currently. Cool. And give us an idea what that town's like. Are we talking kind of near the mountains there?
It is. It's in it's right outside of Pisgah National Forest. And in my opinion, it is, and I'm biased because I live here, but I think that it is the best riding on the East Coast. The mountain biking's amazing in Pisgah. We've got some great gravel riding. The road riding is amazing. I mean, you can go on a road ride and see 2 traffic lights in 5 hours, So I think the riding is great. I also think that the kind of the vibe of the town, it's sort of like a Colorado town on the East Coast, if that makes sense. People here are really into the outdoors, kayaking, fishing, rock climbing, mountain biking, hiking, all of that. So I love it. Doesn't mean I'll stay here forever, but I really do love it right now.
Yeah. So you jump into gravel, and of course, jumping into gravel likely means you're going to jump into what they now call Unbound. And if my research is correct, your first try at that was 2018. You said that race surprised you. Why did it surprise you?
So my first attempt doing Unbound was in 2018, and at the time, I was a 100-mile mountain bike racer. And 100-mile mountain bike races generally take 6 hours on the really fast end, and then if it's a slower course, maybe as long as 7 or 8 hours for the top finishers. And so I was thinking, okay, Unbound's probably a 10 to an 11-hour race. So that's only a little bit longer than what I'm used to. So I should be fine. And I got into that thing I think I got 110 miles or 115 miles in before, I was, the screws just started coming loose and I started unraveling and I went through all the terrible things that people who have done Unbound know about, like bonking and cramping and dehydration and all of that. In the second half of that race. The second half of that race was one of my most miserable experiences on a bike. And yet when I think back to that race, I actually finished in the top 10. I got 9th place, and it's a race that I'm really proud of because I felt like quitting. And I didn't quit, and it actually ended up in a good result. So I'm pretty proud of that first Unbound, and it genuinely shocked me how hard that race was compared to 100-mile mountain bike racing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Unbound is such an interesting character, especially when it comes to equipment. Like, we see a lot of approaches there, a lot of thoughts about what needs to happen there, what you should avoid, what you should go for, aero bars, what have you. We've seen all kinds of interesting tricks there. But that race, at least from our vantage point, somebody hasn't done it, really seems to come down to, like, from equipment at least, tires. Like, tires seem to be either the strong point or the weak point, depending on how you look at it. What have you tried at Unbound, and what would you like to see maybe engineered specifically for races like that?
Sure. Yeah, so the tricky thing with Unbound is that flat tires are just so common there. Just the way the gravel is, it's sharp and it's really easy to get a puncture, even if you're doing everything right, like running thick tires with, lots of sealant and all of that. But so that's definitely an issue at Unbound. Personally, I think that the whole industry has gravel tire size wrong. The more testing I do with gravel tires, the more that I realize that wider is faster. Obviously it still depends on what gravel we're talking about in terms of what the optimal size is. That doesn't change. Smoother gravel, you could probably get away with a smaller tire. Rougher gravel, you need a bigger tire. But I just think that everybody they're thinking in the wrong range. So, for example, I think a lot of people think of a gravel tire being between 35 millimeters and 45 millimeters. Mm-hmm. I think we need to bump that up 10 millimeters.
Wow.
The small, maybe not 10, but like a small gravel tire to me is 40, and I think we could go as high as 55 millimeters in some of these courses. And when I tell people this, they're shocked. They're like, that's so wide. There's no way that's faster. And I'm telling you, I've tested this, and it is.
Why do you suppose people go narrow?
What's that?
Why do you suppose people go too narrow?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that it's, it's like this old school mentality that never seems to die. Narrower is faster. I mean, it's stuff that you guys bang on about in this podcast all the time. It's not necessarily the case. It's not necessarily the case on road. It's not necessarily the case on mountain bikes, and it's not necessarily the case on gravel bikes. Tires in road have been getting wider and wider. Tires in mountain biking have been getting wider and wider. And since gravel is such a new discipline, I only think it's a matter of time before gravel tires get wider as well. I think 10 years from now, we're going to be looking back at 38s and thinking, I can't believe we ever used those.
Mm-hmm. Another thing we harp on this show is ride the most supple tires you possibly can. Now, we see that idea, that mantra kind of get shoved to the side at events like sometimes Leadville for certain Unbound. I mean, I think Keegan, who all of you folks are battling against this year, ran the toughest Maxxis tires he could get his hands on and put inserts in. Like, that seems to fly in the face of speed. So what is your approach in this area regarding, supple and preventing flats, and do you use inserts?
I do use inserts. I use inserts regardless of whether it's a smooth course or not. And I use the kind of inserts that don't touch the sidewalls of the tire so that it's not affecting the rolling resistance. Which is something that I've heard from Josh and heard Josh talk about. But yeah, so it's a trade-off, right? Because supple tires are faster until you're on the side of the road trying to fix a flat tire, and then they're not faster at all. So yeah, at a race like Unbound, I mean, I got a ton of flat tires last year. I wasn't even necessarily running that supple a tire. It's just a brutal course. So you can't really get away with a super supple tire. You need a thicker tire in order to make it to the finish without flatting. And so yeah, I mean, you just kind of got to suck it up and run a thicker tire, even though you know that's not the fastest option. Like the tires that Keegan ran at both Big Sugar and at Unbound are, if you go to like that bicyclerollingresistance.com website, which I am a subscriber of, I look at that site all the time. Those are the slowest gravel tires that you can buy. But they're also the most puncture resistant. And I understand it for Keegan. I mean, Keegan he's trying to be consistent in this series, and he's already strong enough to win the thing. He just needs to not have bad luck, right? So
yeah, he's buying insurance basically, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm interested. I mean, there's podcasts, there's YouTube, but you're coaching people, telling them what tires they have to be rolling, what gains they can make. I'm interested in how do you coach? Say you're coaching me, right? You're telling me what kind of setup I ought to be using for Unbound. How do you get to the right, and how do you get to the right tire setup, to the right bike setup, and how do you get your clients to that point?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of factors to consider with the tire setup. So the smoother the gravel, the narrower the tire can be. And I think that a narrower tire on smoother gravel could be advantageous simply because it's more aerodynamic. And it's aerodynamic both because it's taking up less area, less frontal area, and also if you've got deeper rims, there's a higher probability that a narrower tire is gonna not completely mitigate the aero benefits of that deeper rim. A lot of these gravel tires get wide enough to the point where those deep rims are basically doing nothing for you. But and it's hard to put a number on it, like, at 36 millimeters. If you go over 36 millimeters, then your aero rims aren't working. It's hard to put an exact width because different rim widths work with different tires, and different tires have different tread patterns, and all of that affects the aerodynamics. And aerodynamics is not very intuitive, as we know. So, but a narrower tire is going to be more aerodynamic. So if it's smoother gravel, you can potentially get away with a narrower tire, and it's going to be more aerodynamic, and the speed is going to be higher, which means that aerodynamics matters more. And then the rougher the gravel is, the wider you go with the tire, because the speed's going to be lower. Aerodynamics won't matter quite as much, and the rolling resistance from the wider tire will matter more. And usually when the gravel's rougher, the chance of flatting is higher, and you're going to want to go with a thicker tire that's not as supple as well. Yeah. So these are all the things that I kind of take into account. And if I'm coaching someone specifically, I may also take into account their weight. Heavier you are, the more likely you are to flat. Take into account what speed they're going at. The faster you're going, the more likely you are to flat. Take those factors into account when I give somebody a tire recommendation.
So take us through your PSI life cycle. Since 2018, when you started really attacking the gravel courses, how has your attitude, what kind of adjustments have you made regarding what kind of pressure you're putting in your tires?
Yeah, so the tire pressure conversation. How do you know you're at a gravel race? Everybody's asking you what tire pressure you're running. Yeah. The Southeast Gravel Series, which is like my local gravel series, they run a series called What Pressure, and it's a two-part meaning, right? So what pressure is like what tire pressure are you running, and it's also the pressure of racing. So it's kind of a funny play on words. But yeah, I mean, my tire pressure has only gone down since 2018. I think in 2018 I was probably that was my first season doing any sort of gravel racing. I was probably running, I don't know, 50 psi, 45 psi, way too high. Yeah. And it's only gone down since then. I mean, if it obviously depends on the tire size, but let's say 42 millimeter tires is a pretty standard tire size. And I think I actually ran 42s at Unbound just because they were the strongest tires that I could find and I didn't want a flat. I think that I ran, I'm trying to remember, maybe 29 psi in the rear and 28 psi in the front. Mm-hmm. So the tire pressure has gone down significantly. And some people, when I tell them the tire pressure that I'm running, they're also shocked at how low it is. And how could that be fast? That's too low to be fast. I've also tested tire pressure, and there is a sweet spot, but that sweet spot is generally lower than people think.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that your front pressure is pretty close to your rear, and that's an adjustment that's been made on the Silka calculator, too. They're starting to match those more closely because they're finding that riders are putting as much pressure on their front tire under braking circumstances, under steering circumstances. And I imagine you're finding that on the gravel, too, right? Your weight is being thrown forward. You look at an event like Cedar City. That's the BWR Utah event where there's a downhill at the end. You're on a gravel bike. Yeah. Your weight's going to be on the front there.
Yeah, and also my position on my gravel bike is probably closer to what you'd see on a road bike. It's a very aggressive position, and if I'm running aero bars, it's even more aggressive. So when I use the Silka tire pressure calculator, I actually choose a road bike weight distribution as opposed to gravel bike weight distribution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's get into the other Marginal Gains area, and we've been, on the show starting to try and discover what's happening with drivetrain prep and these dirty events because there's so many uncontrollables there. Unbound this year, in fact, a prime example of how much stress a drive can be put through. You had obviously dirt and dust and then mud as the event wore on. So give us what are some of the things you've experimented with? What works for you as far as a drivetrain prep?
Sure.
For off-road events.
Sure. I use the Silka hot melt wax, and I used to be the kind of guy that was trying to relube my chain mid-race with some squirt or something like that. But then Josh told me that was a bad idea, so I stopped doing that. And what he was saying is that just because you can hear your drivetrain 80 miles into a race or 150 miles into Unbound or something like that, if it's waxed, that doesn't necessarily mean you have got nothing left in there, and you're sacrificing a ton of watts. So that's what I do now. I just hot melt wax my chain, and then there's quite a few things that I do when I'm choosing my drivetrain components to maximize the efficiency as well. So a big conversation is 1x or 2x on the gravel bike. I go with 2x partially because you can get a big range without having big jumps in the cassette, but also because there's less cross chaining, and it's been shown to be a little bit more efficient than a 1x. You've also got a bigger front chainring, and you can pair that bigger front chainring with bigger cogs in the back, and all of that. It means that the chain doesn't have to articulate as much, and you're not cross chaining as much, and that means that you're saving watts in your drivetrain. I also go with a Shimano drivetrain as opposed to a SRAM drivetrain, just because SRAM chains have shown to be a little bit less efficient than a Shimano chain. So my drivetrain that I run on my gravel bike, I run probably bigger chain rings than people would typically run for gravel. I've got a 52 big, 36 small ring, and then pair that with 11 to 34 tooth cassette in the rear. That gearing is not typical gravel gearing, but I don't need that super low gearing for a race like Unbound, and those bigger cogs and bigger chain rings are more efficient.
Is the mountain bike 2x, or especially your Leadville mountain bike, or do you go to 1x there?
I stuck with 1x on the mountain bike. It's very hard to find a 2x setup for a mountain bike.
You can with Shimano. Shimano
That's
still
true.
has it.
That's true. Yeah. I could totally see running a 2x for Leadville. I didn't run a 2x for Leadville, but I could see doing it because you are going to run into both extremes. You're going to have very fast road sections where you need the top end, and then you're going to have extremely slow, steep climbs where you're doing everything you can just to stay on your bike, and you need the lowest gear you can find. I think a 2x makes a lot of sense for Leadville.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, the 1x revolution has been terrific. I think it's absolutely fabulous for trail riding and probably shorter cross-country races. But it feels like, and I think some of these faster racers and like yourself are starting to say, look, hey, at the pointy end here where we're trying to get everything we can out of tires and tire pressure and drivetrain and so forth, the 2x may still have a space at the longer, faster mountain bike races where, you don't want the narrow wide chain ring, grabbing your chain so much. You'd rather have the efficiency of a standard chain ring setup and the tighter shifting, as you mentioned. So maybe we'll see, the 2x the 2x not quite die yet on the mountain bike, which would be great. Let's
I would love to see the 2x not die on the mountain bike. I think we're almost to the point where it has died because I can't remember a single rider in the top 30 at Leadville that had 2x.
Yeah. Speaking of mountain bike, Shawamigan presented an interesting drivetrain dilemma this year. Overnight, you folks got just nailed with the rain. So did you wax the night before, and was that fine the day of? I mean, that was an extreme event that day.
Sure. It actually wasn't even the night before. It was 1 hour before the race. And it was a very surprise thunderstorm. I mean, I remember seeing people on the starting line with file treads because that's what they thought the conditions were going to be like, and it couldn't have been further from that. I mean, it felt like a cyclocross race. I waxed my chain the night before. I think it actually performed pretty well. That's not a particularly long race. It's just 40 miles. It only takes 2 hours, but my drivetrain still felt pretty good at the end of the race, despite the horrible conditions.
Horrible, yes.
Yeah.
Folks, if you want to see some bikes get worked over and some racers, go check out the Shawamigan video from this year. They were quite muddy. It was a little messy, a little sloppy.
How did you feel about having the drop bar set up there?
Yeah, so that was the big thing that Pete Stetton and I did is we ran drop bar bikes for what is technically considered a mountain bike race, but I don't know if I would call it that. It's just a 40-mile race on basically cross-country ski trails. And cross-country ski trails in the summer are bumpy enough that I wouldn't want a gravel bike for them. I think you need a mountain bike, but there's nothing technical about it. Relatively, right? Relatively for a mountain biker, there's not much technical about it. And you can totally ride the whole course fine with drop bars. It's not an issue. So Pete came at it from he made his gravel bike more like a mountain bike in that he put on the Fox gravel fork. I don't know if he played around with the gearing at all, but he had wider tires as well. And so then I think he had 2.0 mountain bike tires, if I'm not mistaken. So then he had a gravel bike that was more like a mountain bike. I came at it from the opposite direction. I made my mountain bike more like a gravel bike, and I took my Factor Lando hardtail mountain bike, and I just put drop bars on it. And that was the main change I made. And I think that the drop bars performed well. I think they would have done even better if it had been a dry race because the speed would have been higher and aerodynamics would have played a bigger part. And I did some calculations before the race. I played around with Bike Calculator. So if you ride for 40 miles at 20 miles per hour, which could have easily been the winning speed had it been dry. I think the winning speed was already like 18 or 19. So if it had been dry, it could have easily been 20 miles an hour. If you ride 40 miles per hour, or if you ride 40 miles at 20 miles per hour and you go from the standard mountain bike position to the drop bar position, that's a savings of 13 minutes according to Bike Calculator. Now that's a rough calculation, but 13 minutes is super significant. And now, of course, this isn't a time trial, right? This is a group. This is a mass start race, and also it's not flat. There's uphills, there's downhills, there's corners, there's all of this. So I don't think the real life savings is 13 minutes, but I 100% believe that drop bars are faster at Schwamigan than flat bars. I just don't think that the strongest riders at the race were riding that, and therefore you didn't see that bike win the race.
So what's the verdict on that bike then? Would you enter it into another event? Can you tell us what event that might be?
If I went back to Schwamigan, I would 100% ride that bike again. And hope for a dry course so that I could really let it shine. I actually found it unfortunate that I didn't. I had an average day at Schwamigan, and the type of race that Schwamigan is doesn't really suit my skill set because it's such a short race and it's basically a cross country effort.
Yeah.
I would have liked to have had a good ride there just so I could kind of prove that bike setup worked, but that's okay. I can try again next year. But I would 100% ride that bike again at Schwamigan, and I've actually experimented with riding that bike at some other courses too. For example, BWR Michigan, I brought both my gravel bike and that bike, fully intending to ride my gravel bike. But then I got there and I did a little bit of a pre-ride, and there were some super deep sand sections that were so deep that people on gravel bikes had to get off and run. Yeah. And there was also 10 miles of single track at the end of that race. And I made the decision to ride the mountain bike, which in hindsight, I don't know if it was the best call because that race literally has 50% road, which the mountain bike was certainly not an advantage on. But during the sand sections, I was easily dropping everyone. I mean, you would get out of these sand sections and I'd look back and I had 30 seconds to a minute. Michael talked to me after the race and he was like, "Wow, Dylan, you attacked so many times at the beginning of that race. That was crazy. I mean, you were constantly off the front." And I was like, I didn't attack one time. I just rode my bike and it was a better bike. I think Alexi saw what was happening. I think he was on 37 slicks. He saw what was happening and he was like, "Well, I can't let Dylan just ride my wheel till we get to that last single track section." And every time we got to a road section, he was attacking. And eventually, I think mile 80 or 90, I couldn't hold anymore. And it was a long solo grind to the finish from there. But I do think that there are courses where that are technically considered gravel courses where a mountain bike with drop bars is actually the faster option.
Yeah.
So take off your pro racer hat for a second and put on your coaching hat. If you are bringing someone into a race during the shoulder season and for what is essentially a shoulder course where it is maybe a mountain bike course, maybe it is a gravel bike course, just depending on the weather of the day, right? And, what kind of tires and all that. How would you correct for the situation you found yourself in, that you brought a right bike for the right course, but not the right bike for the right course for the right day?
Yeah. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I'm bringing, and I don't think most people have this luxury, but I got to the point where I'm bringing both my drop bar mountain bike and my gravel bike to a race and testing them both on the course before race day to see which one is faster. And whichever one is faster is the one that I'm riding. I don't think a lot of people have that luxury when they go to a race. And I think that having maybe 3 or 4 sets of different tires in the car or in the plane with you when you go to a race is probably important. Have a set of tires for the driest possible conditions, have a set of tires for the wettest possible conditions, and have a set of tires for in between. It may even be beneficial to have a set of tires that's a little more puncture resistant and a set of tires that's a little less puncture resistant. And then when you get out on the course and you're looking at it and you're getting intel from other riders about how, what the flat risk is, then you can make those decisions. I don't always like making a last minute tire change because sometimes you can have trouble sealing the tires and there's a slow leak, and that's always a headache to know you have a slow leak while you're trying to race. But sometimes you do have to make those last minute tire decisions.
Yeah. You mentioned aero bars and that you use them, and look, there's no doubt that those work. They work for speed. They're quite good, right? But there seems to be a bit of a clash between tech and the quote-unquote spirit of gravel, and where this, where the sport should point itself.
Sure.
So what do you think? What should give in here?
Sure. So yeah, I find this debate actually super interesting, and it really fascinates me to see different people's takes on this, both sides of the argument. And it's no secret what side of the argument I'm on. I'm a diehard marginal gainer, and in my opinion, aero bars are not even a marginal gain. If we're talking about a race like Unbound, they're a massive gain. We're talking about, I mean, if you could only ride in the aero bars for 50 miles of Unbound, that's a fourth of the race. We're probably talking about a 20 to 25 minute savings.
Wow.
So when you put it in that context, that's not even a marginal gain anymore. And my mentality with it is that I kind of take the mentality of I guess automotive racers. They're always looking for the edge. They're always looking for the equipment edge. I'm the same way. I'm a marginal gainer. I'm always looking for the equipment edge. And if aero bars are legal for the course, I think what hangs people up is that aero bars are not legal for professional road racing. And there's some gravel races where aero bars are not legal either, like BWR doesn't allow aero bars. But if they're legal for the course and they're faster for the course, why would I not have them on my bike? I almost don't understand this thinking of like why I would even, go to the starting line with a disadvantage or not with an advantage. Now, I will say that I actually hope that all my competitors stick to the spirit of gravel side of this discussion, because if aero bars get so common that everybody has them, it's no longer an advantage to have them. You just have to have them in order to get to the playing field of everyone else. I hope that they don't put aero bars on their bike, and that they peer pressure each other out of not using aero bars on their bike. I won't be peer pressured. I'm going to have aero bars on my bike if it's legal.
So let's talk a little about another aspect of possible marginal gaining. We recently had a question for an Ask Josh Anything episode about why aren't mountain bikes aero? What's your take on that?
I think they should be 100%. I mean, it depends on the race, obviously. Some mountain bike races, the speeds are so low if they're super technical. But I mean, even at low speeds, aerodynamics makes a little bit of a difference. But we saw at Leadville this year, I mean, aerodynamics played a huge part in Leadville. There are some parts of Leadville where you're going at road speed. So yeah, I mean, I want to see aerodynamic shaped mountain bike bars. I want to see aerodynamic shaped mountain bike frames. All of that. I want to see aerodynamics get into mountain bikes. I don't know if it will. I don't know of anyone in the industry that's pushing that direction. But when I race a mountain bike, I wear an aero skin suit, I wear an aero helmet, I wear aero socks, I wear aero gloves, as if I'm doing a time trial on the road. Like the skin suit that I have is literally a time trial skin suit with a zipper in the back. So and I use that for mountain bike racing. So I 100% take aerodynamics seriously on the mountain bike as well.
So we have seen Scott bikes make. Now they haven't made an aero claim, but it certainly seems like it would have an aero benefit. And they're now stashing their shocks on their full suspension on a couple of their full suspension bikes into the seat tube. It gets it out of there, and we know from what Ineos has been telling us that seat tube, seat post area is 40% of your drag on a bicycle, and anything you can do to clean up airflow around that area is going to help. Now, so if you're a full suspension mountain biker, getting rid of the shock or at least hiding it strategically would certainly help clean things up. But yeah, there's no one really. How did Josh answer that question, Fatty, when it was posed to him in the last AJA? He said, why are there no aero mountain bikes? Because no one's thinking of it. I mean, that was his
100%
conclusion there, right?
Yeah.
Right? What are we thinking of the mountain bikes? We're thinking of how much travel we can get, how how angled we can make our head tubes, how wide of a tire we can get in there, but very little about going fast in a straight line. Yeah.
So one recent trend in mountain biking that is actually making mountain bikes more aero that consumers seem to hate is this trend where companies are running the cables through the headset instead of running the cables down to the head tube and through the frame. And so when you're running the cables through the headset, you're reducing the amount of exposed cable on the front of the bike. And on a mountain bike, there can actually be quite a lot of exposed cable. And not having as much exposed cable is more aerodynamic. And I guarantee you that none of these companies are doing it because it's more aerodynamic. They're probably doing it to clean up the look of the bike. And if you go on a Pink Bike and look at any new mountain bike that has the cables running through the headset, every comment is, I can't, why are they running the cables through the headset? This is such a pain. Why do bike companies do this? I'm all for that as well. I mean, it's making the bike look cleaner, but it's also improving the aerodynamics. I don't know, honestly. I don't know if there will get to a point where mountain bikes, where we're seeing aero mountain bikes, but I would love to see it.
In the meantime, you are, of course, you're racing and coaching. I'm going back to this again, and you see it at races, because you're doing a lot of mass start events. You're seeing racers, who are more in the citizen group, who are making mistakes. What are some of the either marginal gains, or let's call it, the big gains that people can make to be a little faster, whether on gravel or whether on a mountain bike? What are the?
Yeah. So the biggest mistake that I see your average racer make and your elite racer make is not even an equipment choice, it's a pacing choice. And that pacing choice is to ride super hard to try to get with a fast group in the first hour of a 7 to 10 hour race, and then paying the consequence for that for the entire rest of the race. And I've been, since I started coaching, I've looked at power files from long races, and it's almost a universal law that you look at a power file from a long race and it just drops throughout the race. The power just keeps dropping throughout the race, which I've done research on pacing. That's theoretically, that's not the optimal way to pace. You would theoretically, the optimal way to pace is to have an even pacing strategy where you're doing the same power output in the first half as you are in the second half, or even doing a negative split where you're actually going harder in the second half. And that's just what nobody does that at Unbound, and no one does that at Leadville. And believe me, I'm not immune from that either. I make the same mistake, although I try not to. I think that is the number one mistake that your typical gravel participant makes when they get into one of these big gravel races, is their pacing is just atrocious.
Yep.
So we talked a lot about aero there. I think it's kind of funny, you do all you can to optimize your bike, Dylan, getting it sleek and hiding cables and making sure that your expensive carbon rims are doing all the work that they should. Then the organizer hands you a number plate and says, "Here, put this on the front of your bike." Yeah. So what do you do? Give us some number plate tricks. How do you try and hide that thing, curl it, furl it? What do you do?
Sure. So I actually think that I came up with a great race number solution this year. So race promoters hate when you curl your number, and it's because the timing chip doesn't work. So they're understandably frustrated when everybody's timing chip doesn't work because they're trying to get more aero. I definitely have sympathy for that. So what I did this year is, for a lot of races, is instead of putting the number on my handlebars, I actually put the number sideways on my frame. And that way the massive sail that is the number is not hitting the wind. If anything, it might actually make the bike a little more aerodynamic. I don't know. I haven't tested it, but so the number is on the front of the bike, but it's on the frame and it's sideways. It's not front facing. Now, not every race promoter likes that. In fact, the race promoter from Big Sugar sent me an Instagram DM, and he said, "Hey, Dylan, can you please put your number on the front of the bars like it's supposed to be?" I said, "Yeah, that's no problem. I'll definitely do that." So, yeah.
I love that you're innovating, though. I mean, yeah. So next time you won't, but it's you are thinking about it and putting, trying different things out. I mean, really, the answer ought to be the big race plate numbers are a relic from an old era where people didn't think about that. And that chip, it should be, I mean, it should just have, it should have two-sided tape, and you put it, and you go ahead and you stick it to your down tube, right? There's no reason why it couldn't do that. The number itself no longer needs to be there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that race promoters could do it. I know what the argument is. It's like, hey, if everybody has a sail on the front of their bike, then it's a disadvantage for everyone. So it does make me cringe a little bit, though, knowing all the engineering that went into making my aero gravel bike as aero as it possibly could be, and then all of that just going down the drain when I slap a sail on the front of my bike.
Yep.
Yeah. Like we said, Dylan runs a great YouTube channel. We love your videos, Dylan. They're a great look at your experiences and your training practices. And then, even I can't race nearly as fast as you, neither can Fatty, but as a user of those videos, I get something out of them more than just your vlog or how your day went or whatever. I learned something about, I could apply that to my experience, to my race, or to something I'm trying to do, which makes them, real user-friendly. Now, the one that caught my eye recently was your Spirit of Gravel video. I talked about this earlier. Kind of a tongue-in-cheek video, yet kind of serious commentary, I thought. So what were you trying to say about Spirit of Gravel, and how did it go over with your audience and with your peers?
Sure. So, I mean, the audience loved it. It was almost all positive comments on that. Yeah, so the Spirit of Gravel video, that was all Backwards Hat Dylan, which is my partner in crime, I guess.
Your alter ego.
The alter ego, yeah. So he's the one that makes snarky comments throughout my videos to have a little bit of comedic relief, and then that video was just all him. So there's nothing. If somebody watched that video and they're taking it seriously, please don't take it seriously. It's not a serious video. It's meant to be comedic. I hope that came across in the video. But I mean, this whole Spirit of Gravel discussion. I think that at this point it's a little bit of a meme, and people trying to uphold the Spirit of Gravel and all of this. I don't know. I think that you need to just let gravel evolve, and not try to hold on to what gravel used to be, like, back when Unbound first happened, and people were just trying to survive or whatever. If gravel gets more competitive, if the UCI steps in, I mean, granted, there's things that the UCI are doing that I would fix, but if I remember when World Tour riders first did Unbound and people were all up in arms, like, why are these World Tour riders here? It's like, hey, I thought gravel was supposed to be inclusive. Like, how about we include the fast people? How about we include the people that want to run aero bars and want to do all the marginal gains and want to go as fast as possible, as well as including the person that's just trying to finish and doesn't care about how fast they go, but just wants to have a fun time on the bike. All those people. Yeah, I mean, I find the whole spirit of gravel discussion, I think, is a meme at this point, and I just find it a little bit funny.
Yeah.
True. Yep. We can't take ourselves too seriously now, right? I mean,
well, some of us can.
Agreed. And what I think is funny is that in trying to not take the spirit of gravel partially is about not taking gravel too seriously, and then in doing that, you're taking the spirit of gravel way too seriously, right?
We take not being serious very seriously. Absolutely.
Right.
So, I mean, you're at the end of that season. You've done this incredibly trying set of races, the Grand Prix, and I'm kind of want to get to the recovery marginal gain piece. You're a coach. You are no doubt exhausted. We weren't able to get you on this show in between races because you just had so much going on. It's how are you doing, and what do you recommend to people so that they can stay sharp and fast and recover well?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think recovery is hugely overlooked. If you want to put it in the marginal gains category, you can, but again, I think it's just like aero bars. I don't think it's a marginal gain.
It's a macro gain. Yeah,
exactly. So, yeah, I mean, there's day-to-day recovery, and then there's kind of recovery after a long season. I just got done doing that. I took 2 weeks completely off the bike, didn't ride the bike for 2 full weeks, and then I'm kind of getting back into it slowly here. I also do a mid-season break where I'll take a week off the bike mid-season. This year I did it after Unbound, and it actually worked out pretty well because I had COVID during that time, so I wasn't riding because of COVID, and I also wasn't riding because I planned to take a mid-season break anyway. But yeah, I think that there's so many gravel races to choose from, and it's very easy to over race. And I think that talking with a lot of athletes, I think they got to the point this year where they just felt like they were overdoing it, and there wasn't enough time between races, and they were just feeling over raced and under recovered. And again, recovery is on a day-to-day basis with the choices that you're making to, get more sleep, get better nutrition, and it's also more macro. What are you doing in the season to better recover? Taking those mid-season breaks, those off-season breaks.
Absolutely. Little pause here for a sec. There? I think, we've got a great hour here. I don't know if there's more that you want to get in. Dylan, is there anything that you would like us to make sure that we get in?
I'm trying to think. We covered a lot. I mean, I think we covered a lot.
I mean, do you maybe end on, so what do you have in store for 2023?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
So looking forward, Dylan, what do you have going on for 2023?
Yeah, so I want to see what the Lifetime Grand Prix comes out with for what they're doing for 2023. I would like to do the series again, although I talking with some athletes who did the Lifetime Grand Prix, I won't name names, but they were talking about how they don't want to do the series again, maybe because they just want to focus on the races that they like to do. Because the Lifetime Grand Prix is a huge commitment, and there are some races in the Lifetime Grand Prix that if they weren't part of the Grand Prix, I wouldn't go do them. And I could maybe focus my energy on a race that I really want to do instead. So I see that side of it. I kind of want to see what they do with the series. If they add more races, if they add more participants, I'll wait and see what they're doing, and I'll likely apply for that again. And if I apply for the Lifetime Grand Prix again, that'll probably be my main focus. Although some of these BWR races, especially the new ones that they've added and what they're doing with that series, I'd like to do more of those. I had a really good time at the BWR Michigan race. The BWR Asheville race is right in my backyard. like the roads that they use for BWR Asheville are roads that I ride on a weekly basis. So I would like to do those as well. And then on the YouTube side, I just want to keep making regular content for people, and just keep growing the channel.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dylan, we'll look for you next year on a drop bar mountain bike or in your aero bars on your gravel bike at a start line near you. Thanks for coming on Marginal Gains and sharing your wisdom and knowledge about how to go a little faster.
Yeah, thanks for having me.